Good morning, everybody. How are you? Barely, apparently. Thankfully, the one person who's awake is sitting in the front row. So, my son graduated preschool a few months ago. I was waiting for someone to applaud it, but you're right. It's not really applause-worthy. I mean, graduating preschool. But when I asked him what the most exciting thing about preschool was, what the most memorable thing was, he thought for just a briefest moment, and then he said being the line leader, which I think a lot of us can kind of relate to, because that was the coolest job on the job board, right? It was certainly a whole heck of a lot better than being the pencil sharpener or cleanup helper or lights helper or, God forbid, the caboose, right? The line leader was always one of the more exciting things because you got to be in front of the group, you got to lead the way, boldly going where, who knows, every other class has gone before, PE, music, and so on. But still, there was sort of this position of leadership. What's strange, though, is that over time, the idea of being line leader has come to mean something very different. And now what I've found is that most educators or most schools and most districts are actually rather terrified of being the line leader. They're terrified of kind of being first. They're terrified of being the one to break the new ground because there is that element of risk. Something could go wrong. It could reflect poorly on our school. And that is terrifying for a school district. They don't like to be in a situation where there might be some element of risk. Now, I know a lot about being first. In fact, I owe my entire career to being first in a few key little areas. I was the first educational podcaster. Some of you may have listened to it. I used to podcast from my Mitsubishi Eclipse on Lakeshore Drive while driving home in the rain with a cryptic rattle in the back of my trunk that turned out to be an axle that wasn't quite as well attached as my mechanic would have liked. I was also the first educator on Twitter. My Twitter birthday was October 23rd, 2006, roughly 2,109 days ago, and yes, I know how sad it is that I know that. But here's the funny thing. There's a couple services that allow you to go back and look up your first few tweets. My first tweet was just like all of yours, trying Twitter. Second tweet, though, was adding Twitter badge to my blog. And the only reason why I think that's fair to mention is because really a lot of these social tools and so on, there's really no value to them at all if you're not going to take the time to be connected to people, if you're not going to actually let people know what you're doing. What's the point of taking the time to share and putting yourself out there if people aren't necessarily listening? And that is, I think, there's an element of marketing to it. Because you want to connect to people, you want people to listen to you, you need to be able to market yourself to make these connections in the 21st century, but schools are terrible marketers. And most teachers are terrible marketers. Schools are awful about telling their stories, about the great things that are happening in their classrooms right now. They're very good at reacting to things. They're very good at reacting to stories. They're not good at telling about the great things that are happening. And teachers, I hate to say it, but teachers are awful marketers too. You know why? We're all too humble. We're too humble, we don't like to brag, and so on. But the trouble is, when the schools are awful marketers and the teachers are awful marketers, the students become awful marketers. We've created an environment where most students feel that they need to kind of hide what they're doing. My son is going into kindergarten. I pulled up the policy from my district. It's the media policy. It states that they will not publish any of his work with anything more than his first name on it. And if they show a photo of him, they will not put any name on it at all. Most schools are exactly like that, at least here in the U.S. My son has over 3,000 photos on Flickr right now, over 200 videos on YouTube. He has a Facebook account. He has an email address, and all of them have his first and his last name. Do you really think that my concern is that the school will keep him private? That's not my issue. My issue is the exact opposite. The things that he does in school are probably going to be the best things that he has to offer. That's going to be his digital portfolio, his permanent record, the things that he should stand up and be proud of. And if the teacher doesn't exercise some search engine optimization, then it's not going to show up when they do a Google search on his name. That's a problem. Jeff was talking about yesterday about leaving, we're all leaving these little trails of breadcrumbs. That's fine. I don't mind his personal life being a trail of breadcrumbs, but the stuff he does in school, I want to be bread bombs. I want people to be able to find that stuff. I want people to be able to access that. I want him to be able to brag and stand up and say, this is who I am, this is my digital identity, and I want that to all be funneled through school. That's the issue to me. So when I get that policy, I'm going to have to mark the heck out of it and then turn it back in. I've already apologized to my wife many times for the type of kindergarten father that I'm going to be. And I do feel bad because I used to teach kindergarten, so what are you going to do? See, here's the trouble. When they revised Bloom's taxonomy, they redid that whole pyramid, and they put at the top of it creation. And creation is good. Don't let me, I'm not trying to bash creation in any way, shape, or form. But here's the issue. Creation in isolation is wholly inadequate, especially in today's society. If you are doing great things and they are not being elevated, they are not being shared, they are not being seen by others, then it's kind of a waste. It's kind of a waste. One of the best examples of this is Kane's Arcade. If you don't know the story of Kane's Arcade, you should go look it up. But essentially, it's this kid in the East LA area that created this entire arcade, Chuck E. Cheese-style arcade, out of cardboard in his father's auto shop during the summer. And here's the crying shame about it. Nobody would know this story. Nobody would have ever heard about this brilliant project that this kid did if someone hadn't happened to walk into that shop who just happened to be a documentarian looking for a subject. If that man hadn't walked through that shop on that day and known how to organize a flash mob and create a documentary and done all the marketing for him, Kane may have never been discovered. The great work that Kane was doing we may never have been inspired by him, and that's a shame. And I feel like that's happening in our schools all the time. It's funny, I constantly hear people tearing down the schools, especially here in the U.S., saying that we are in a crisis of accountability. We're in a crisis of relevancy. I beg to differ. I think what we're in is a crisis of transparency. We are in a society that is always going to want some sort of measurement, some sort of comparison. I got news for you. Test scores aren't going away. They're not. They're always going to be around there. There's always going to be some sort of measure. But the thing is, if those aren't telling the whole story, well, then the question is, how do we as educators, how do our schools tell the other half of that story and make sure that it gets heard, that it gets communicated, that it gets elevated? That's the key. We're not going to be able to get rid of all these acronyms. There's always going to be something putting pressure on teachers and so on. And this may sound like a horrible statement to make, but teachers are like cockroaches. I don't care how much pressure you put on them, they will endure. You know, and it's funny because, yeah, please don't tweet out the teacher. All right, whatever. Do what you got to do. I know, too late. That's the trouble. Listen, I know it's not all duckies and bunnies. I know that there are very real issues that we need to deal with. But here's the thing that I have found. I have traveled through, I work for Discovery Education, I work with our teacher community. I spend half of my job traveling the country, traveling the world for the most part, and visiting with teachers, working with them in their institute days, talking with them, conversing with them, and hearing their stories. I've heard it said that up to 20% of teachers are incompetent, they're just skating by, they just don't care. I can't find that 20%. Every single all right, first of all, wait a minute, if it's 1 in 5, 20% of this room is incompetent or skating by. Would you please stand up? All right, fine. We got one. And you? Okay, fine. Time. Okay, yeah, I get it. All right, no, I'm just kidding. Here's the thing. Every teacher I've met is phenomenal, is a rock star, is passionate about education. They didn't get into it for the fame and fortune. They didn't get into it for money. They got into it because they firmly believe in what they are doing and in making a difference in the world through educating children. Yes, there's always room for improvement, but they are phenomenal. We have some of the best teachers in the world right here in U.S. schools. People say we need to innovate our way out of this mess. I disagree. I think the innovators are in our classrooms. We've just had a whole stage of them go by. We've seen, yesterday, we'll see a whole other stage of them come by today. I've seen them in conferences online. I read their blog posts. I see them on Twitter. The innovators are in our schools. The only trouble is people think they're crazy. People do. But you know who else was crazy? The prophets. Part of the job description of a prophet was being insane. You know what? That's not necessarily a bad thing. Technology goes through 3 phases of adoption. The first one is people mock it mercilessly. Secondly, they violently oppose it. Vehemently oppose it. Third, it's just considered self-evident. Think about Twitter, about Instagram, about Facebook. Think about Foursquare. The first time you heard that someone checked in at Walgreens, you probably thought they were nuts, and they probably were. But the second time someone checked into it, that's when you started hearing things. If you check in at Walgreens and people know that you're gone, someone will come to your house, they will break in, they will rob you, they will kidnap your kids. Nothing good can come of this. And just half a year later, a year later, millions upon millions of people are checking in constantly. It's considered self-evident. Being on the front end of that wave is being a prophet. Yes, people will look at you like you're a little crazy. That's okay. Embrace that. Be willing to be the crazy one in your faculty. I think that one of our biggest issues as a community is that we do too much talking globally. And I think we need to stop that. It is far more comfortable and safe to talk to a general global audience via blog, via YouTube, and via Twitter than it is to walk into your superintendent's office and say, I see an issue and I want to do something about it. I actually asked my wife this morning for our superintendent's phone number because I was going to call him and see if I could set up an appointment with him and put my money where my mouth is to talk about the very issue that I pointed out this morning about media. But I see from the clock I don't actually have time to do it, and I'm afraid that someone's going to walk out here and start playing music. So I will do that as soon as I go backstage. But if I say anything to all of you, it's stop just talking to the general audience and start focusing in on where your kids are, where you're teaching, and do everything you can to make that difference on a local level. Help our schools be bold, be fearless, and not be afraid to be first. Thank you very much, everybody.